Hey, legal pagers. Welcome to this episode of the Legal Page podcast, where we're talking all about independent contractors versus employees. I've been fielding questions like crazy on my Instagram and Legal Page private community on Facebook regarding this topic, so I thought it was time that we do an official podcast episode to give you all the info you need in one place. As small business owners, entrepreneurs, and creatives, we need help managing our businesses as we grow. That's just a reality. And at a certain point, it just is impossible to get all of the work done by yourself. And when we hire help, the biggest dilemma that most people face is, should I hire individuals as independent contractors or employees? So if you're looking to hire someone onto your team, whether that's a virtual assistant, second shooter, assistant photographer, copywriter, graphic designer, this episode is definitely for you. Make sure to listen in carefully to the differences between these two worker designations because it could cost you and turn into a huge headache with the IRS if you aren't handling your workers correctly. Okay, let's do this, legal pagers. You're listening to the Legal Page podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. As a reminder, before we get into this episode, I am legally obligated to give my disclaimer. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. So what that means is that all legal information that I talk about in this episode is intended for the masses and a large variety of different businesses. I am only your personal attorney when you hire me, and we sign an engagement letter for me to work specifically on your legal needs. Feel free to seek out another attorney in your hometown and state if you need specific legal advice, or contact me for more information and I'll get you pointed in the right direction. Okay, let's get to it. Correctly classifying workers as an employee or an independent contractor is super important as a business owner. For federal employment tax purposes, a business must examine this relationship between itself as the business and the worker. And you guys, it is all about control. So remember that concept and word of control as we go over big key concepts in this episode. So let's start out with the basics of independent contractors and employees. So an independent contractor is essentially someone who runs their own business or is working under their social security number. They are their own person and they freelance for other businesses. And an employee is hired by you to work at the discretion of you as their employer. I like to call it the difference between W-2 land and W-9 land. Now, I'm going to go through the following general principles that will help you better understand the differences in hiring a contractor versus an employee. I'm going to walk you through the financials, hours and location, employment laws, reporting requirements, payment schedules, insurance and tax withholdings, and tax documents. So first, let's start out with financials. If you are hiring an employee, you are paying for their equipment, like a computer and other gear necessary to complete their job requirements. You're paying for all expenses associated with them working for you, including all travel and reimbursements. And you are paying for a portion of their taxes. And this is the biggie here. So what that means is that you're in charge of payroll. So instead of paying this worker a flat rate of, say, $500 per month, you, as the employer, are required to determine their gross earnings, whether that's weekly, biweekly, or monthly, and then you take out deductions from their gross pay amount, such as federal income tax withholdings, Social Security tax withholdings, Medicare withholdings, state income tax withholdings, and potential other tax withholdings if they have those in their local taxes or county taxes. This means you either need to find time in your schedule to do this, or you need to pay an accountant to run payroll for you. Then, as the employer, you have the additional responsibility for paying the employer's share of payroll taxes. So these payroll taxes are an added expense over and above the expense of the employee's gross pay. So you also have to pay FICA taxes. FICA stands for the Federal Insurance Contribution Act. And under this, the FICA tax consists of both Social Security and Medicare taxes. So that means that Social Security and Medicare taxes are paid by both the employee out of their gross pay, and then the employer has to match it. So each party pays half of those taxes. So together, I'm just going to give you some numbers here. We're going to go into a little math. Both halves of the FICA taxes add up to about 15.3%. And that's broken down as half for each. So the employer pays 6.2% out of their paycheck for Social Security and 1.5% for Medicare. And then you match that as the employer. Essentially, what I'm trying to tell you is that financially, it is more expensive to hire an employee. You have to run payroll, and then you have to pay this additional Social Security and Medicare taxes above and beyond their gross pay. But in regards to an independent contractor would only be paid that either flat rate a month. So we'll go back to my example of $500 per month, or they will be paid hourly, say like $15 per hour. They would keep track of their own hours, and then you would add that up at the end of the month and say it's $300 by the end of the month or by the end of a 2-week period, whatever you guys agree on as a contractor. And you pay them that flat rate. You don't have to deal with taxes. They have to pay all of their self-employment taxes at the end of the year on their own personal tax return. So financially, it definitely makes more sense for business owners who are just starting out if you aren't, looking to hire someone and pay all of these extra things like payroll and match these taxes above their gross pay, which you would have to do with an employee. You would want to hire a contractor because it's just a flat rate, and then these contractors are in charge of their own taxes. Now, in terms of hours and location, employees should either be tracking hours by if you pay them hourly or if you pay them that set fee if they're paid a salary. This is very similar for employees and independent contractors. But with employees, you need to set up a specific time frame that you will pay them, such as weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly, and stick to it. It's really, really important that it isn't willy-nilly with employees and that they're getting paid at set times throughout the month. For independent contractors, though, they can be paid the same way. Like I said, they can be paid hourly or a set amount. It's similar to a salary, but it's more often just called a fixed fee. And however, instead of having them clock in like an employee would, or you having access to their timesheet, which you would with an employee, a contractor keeps track of their own time. So if they're paid hourly, they will submit their own time to you. There is also a difference between how you pay an employee versus an independent contractor. So an employee will simply be paid off of the timesheet or the set amount per pay period with their salary. But an independent contractor must submit an invoice to you. This is the biggest issue I see with people in the online industry hiring independent contractors. The contractor has to act as a separate business and needs to be independent. Thus, they have to send you an invoice for their services. You should not be sending them a check every month or paying direct deposit without the invoice from that specific contractor. Now, the location of where these workers work is also important. With an employee, you can set specific parameters for them coming into the office during certain hours and having a desk that they work at for you to oversee them day in and day out. But if you hire an independent contractor, you cannot determine how they work. Thus, they should work primarily remotely and not at your office, should be using their own equipment and not the company's equipment, and merely be just completing the project or task that you ask them to do on their own time whenever they see fit. So, an independent contractor, if they want to work at 2 a.m. on their couch, they can certainly do that, just as long as the work is done for you by the time frame that you allotted or the project completion date. Next is employment law differences. Employees and contractors are different in regards to employment laws. So employees are covered by a number of federal and state labor laws, whereas contractors are not covered by any employment or labor laws. Thus, employers must pay into the workers' compensation fund and unemployment insurance, and then the employees that they hire are covered with these benefits. And essentially, they are insured on the job working for you. So it's really a benefit to someone that is coming on to work for you. They have additional extra insurance. Independent contractors, though, need to likely have their own insurance to ensure that they are covered if they get hurt while working for you. So this can be a hiccup for some employers when they are hiring on independent contractors, because sometimes these independent contractors need to have all of these additional things that they have to pay for on their own. So you just need to look out for that. Next is reporting requirements. You have different reporting requirements for each status of employees or contractors. For employees, employers must report all money paid to the employee during their tax year on a W-2, which is why I call it W-2 land. But for contractors, employers must report payments of over $600 or more in a calendar year on a Form 1099. So the difference really here, you guys, is that an employee, when you hire them, you have to keep track of everything, all of the net pay that you've given them. You report that on a W-2, and then they take the W-2 and they submit it for their own personal tax returns. And the W-2 shows their gross pay, shows what they've paid into taxes, and then also shows the net pay. But for contractors, you're really just saying, I paid you, say, $750 this year flat rate, and you put that on a Form 1099. And what that does is it alerts the IRS that this specific person, whether they are acting as an actual business or under their social security number, has been paid this amount by you. It serves as a checks and balances for the IRS so that, one, you can deduct this amount on your taxes as an expense for paying this contractor. And then on the other hand, it tells the IRS that this specific person, whether it's with a federal EIN number or a social security number, that that person received income for you and it should be on their tax return. Next is unemployment insurance. So business owners need to report state and federal unemployment insurance for employees, but business owners have no obligation to do so for contractors. I just want to talk a little bit about unemployment insurance because I get asked this question a lot. So in most cases, you must pay unemployment insurance for every employee on your payroll. So the Federal Unemployment Tax Act, which is called FUTA, this began in around 1935. It requires employers to include unemployment insurance payments to both state and federal governments in their payroll taxes for all their employees. So FUTA tax is mandated, like I said, by the federal government, and it really is just the Fed's oversight of each state's employment insurance program. So we have to pay into that as employers. But you also have to pay into your state unemployment insurance program. And this is actually what pays out benefits to unemployed workers in your state. So it really is a security blanket for not only your employees, but it serves as this pot of money for all employees across the state. So we all contribute to this as employers. Now, these taxes are only paid by the employer. So on top of your Social Security and Medicare taxes that you have to double up and pay in addition to your employee paying them, you also have to pay these unemployment insurance taxes. So don't withhold these taxes from your employees' wages. That's a big no-no. And just so you guys know, the FUTA tax, which is the federal tax, is only paid on the first $7,000 that each employee earns a year. So this $7,000 mark is called the wage base. You don't owe anything above that $7,000. The state tax as well has a wage base, but that is determined by your state. So when you first hire on your first employee, you need to register for an account with your state unemployment agency. This is very important because, like I talked about, all of this is paid out through your state when workers are unemployed. So new employers start with some type of introductory employment tax rate, and then new employer rates last for a set period of time. Like I said, it's determined state by state. And then after your introductory rate, your state will update your tax rate on an annual basis. So they really determine it based on how much is the gross pay for your employees, yada, yada. So each state uses different methods to determine these rates, and it will consider the industry that you are hiring these employees onto, the number of unemployment claims that your former employees have filed, like I talked about, their actual wage rate, so on and so forth. But all in all, sometimes this gets complicated when hiring on an employee, which is why I always suggest you chat with an accountant, because having them run payroll and ensure you are all set up to pay for unemployment insurance in your state will save you tons of hours and potential penalties down the road. So just chat with your local CPA on this. Next is necessary contracts. When you hire on an employee, you need to ensure that you first send them an offer letter that they sign and agree to the simple terms like hourly rate or salary, starting date, hours to be worked. And then you also want to include in that letter whether paid time off will be included and other benefits, like if healthcare is included when you hire them on as an employee. Then they will need to fill out a W-4 for payroll purposes on the date that they start. And then when they also start, you want them to sign an employee agreement. So those three things are offer letter, then they file their W-4 with you, and then they also sign an employee agreement. For an independent contractor, though, you need to ensure that you simply just have an independent contractor agreement in place. Now, this can be one of two ways. Either they could have one that you sign, like they have their own contract that they sign to hire them, which is likely in cases such as a copywriter, an editor, a virtual assistant could maybe even have one for their services as well. Or you would send them one to sign, and then you would need to ensure that you have this agreement in place and all of your procedures and policies regarding this contractor working for you within that contract. So all of these lay out, like I said, the roles and responsibilities of them working for you. I would suggest that it include a very clear clause stating your work relationship, that they're a 1099 worker and that no taxes will be taken out. That's a biggie clause you need to include. You also want to include that they are required to send you an invoice before getting paid. You need to set out the fees, so what the hourly rate is or if it's a fixed rate for their services. Also include what intellectual property will be theirs or owned by your company. Lots of times we're hiring on people. I just love the example of a copywriter because because a copywriter is writing things for you and they're writing things as if you are writing them as a business owner. So in that case, they wouldn't own the copyright to their actual words. They would want to waive copyright ownership, and then you would own the copyright and intellectual property to all of the words that they produce for your business. Other important clauses are also in there. I would suggest, of course, you have a confidentiality clause, because likely these contractors are going to learn lots of information that is confidential about your business, whether that's workflow, whether that's client lists, whether that's what you're, getting paid. You just want to make sure that stays entirely confidential with any contractor that you hire on. Alrighty, next thing we're discussing is non-competes versus non-solicitation clauses. This is a biggie that I see all the time in our online industry that is a big no-no. So you cannot really have an independent contractor with a non-compete clause. The reason you are hiring them as a contractor is that you want them to still be independent. So I want to start off with what a non-compete actually is. So non-compete clauses and contracts are restrictions that control this employee or contractor's future ability to work for competitors of you as the employer. So non-competes are all about control, and it's telling this specific person that they can't do things on their own because it will compete with your business and your clientele. Now, while there isn't a black or white answer to this in the legal world, side note here, welcome to the legal world where all things are gray and lawyers are always on both sides arguing two different things. I am just one of those lawyers that truly believe that a non-compete has no place in an independent contractor agreement. I could really argue until the cows come home that it looks way more like an employee when you are controlling this non-competition issue. So first off, let's talk about this person as a contractor. So if this person is so integral to your business and you're so worried about them competing with you, he or she is not really being engaged as an independent enterprise and contractor. They're actually just acting as an arm of your company, and that would be an employee. So if you're so worried about this and you need to add in a non-compete, they really just look like an employee. Thus, having this contractor sign an agreement, which includes a non-compete, puts you at serious risk of owing penalties, overtime pay, additional benefits, workers' compensation, unemployment insurance to the state and feds that we talked about at the beginning of this episode. So instead, I suggest you hire people when you want to add in a non-compete, that you just hire them as an employee right off the bat. The burden of you owing a little bit more financially and putting them on payroll is definitely outweighed here by the ability for you to have them sign a non-compete and protect your legitimate business interests. I promise you. Or just think about, if you really don't want to hire them on as an employee, just simply hire them on as a contractor. Don't have them sign a non-compete, but merely have them sign a non-solicitation and confidentiality clause or additional contract. So the non-solicitation part of your contract, which is either a clause or you have them sign an additional contract like I talked about, non-solicitation means that while they can go find their own outside clients while working for you, because they aren't under a non-compete, they still can't steal your current or existing clients. So non-solicitation means you can't solicit my current or existing clients as your employer. And then the confidentiality provisions will ensure that they can't take your client's lists, the workflow, the processes, the intellectual property, or really specific business know-how to their benefit and then go off on their own and make money. So non-solicitation is okay to put in an independent contractor agreement, but a non-compete is not. The biggest takeaway I want you to remember from this episode, if all else fails, is that it's all about control of your workers. contractors, and I talked about this concept at the beginning of the episode. Non-competes really shouldn't exist with contractors, and it makes you incredibly at risk. That's why I suggest you hire them as employees. And if you're here listening in as a photographer, and I get this question a lot, if you often hire on second shooters for weddings, although you control the wedding venue location and the time that the second shooter needs to be there shooting, they would still be independent contractors because they have the ability to say no to the job when you ask them to work at that wedding. They're using their own equipment. They give you the raw files after completion of the event. And of course, they're not signing non-competes. They're just signing probably non-solicitations that they can't go to these wedding events and then solicit all of these guests or clients, bridesmaids at these weddings because it's your wedding as somebody that's hiring them just on as a second shooter. So, of course, they can still take on clients outside of the ones you've booked under their own photography company. They are still contractors, so don't worry about exercising a tiny bit more control over them for the specific wedding event. Just make sure that they're sending you an invoice, that they're using their own equipment, and that they really have a say whether yes or no to that particular job. Whew. Okay, I know that was a lot, but this is a super important episode for you as a business owner because I want you to know and understand the big differences with independent contractors and employees. But before I move on to what I would suggest for you, I did want to point out some key reasons why hiring an employee could be better for your specific business. So I myself have hired on both contractors and employees and really love having employees instead because I control all the things that they work on. I can control their hours, their projects. I have oversight on them. I can give them non-competes. You really name it. To me, those benefits far outweigh the cost of me having to pay a little extra in taxes for them to be on my team. Also, I've learned this. The fact that they are receiving some type of benefits from me, whether that's paid time off, healthcare, when they have those benefits and they have a set income coming in, say, every 2 weeks or every month, they, as an employee, feel like a real part of my company. And I have learned that it makes them work harder, and it honestly gives them a sense of ownership and pride in what they're working on. So all in all, I just want you all here that are listening into this episode to know that I have seen my needle move way more in my business when I've hired on employees. However, you are all likely not quite at the stage yet where hiring an employee makes sense. My take is that you should start by just hiring on independent contractors. It's a great way to help your business without that commitment, liability, and risk of taking on an employee and a lot of extra money like I talked about. So I would recommend that you as a small business owner first seek help from independent contractors. Your business is likely to fluctuate as you start out and grow. So I don't want you to be stressed out about having to pay for an employee and all of the extra things that come with it. Contractors will allow you to get the help where and when you need it, like a copywriter or an editor or a virtual assistant or someone who's just in your email inbox or someone who is just answering client inquiries. Literally, you can have them do very specific jobs as contractors. And it just allows you to hire someone with a set amount of hours or a set fee, and you don't have to pay for all of their equipment and all of these extra things involved with bringing on an employee. Now, I want to go back to the big thing we talked about at the beginning, the concept of control. And I've integrated that throughout this podcast episode today because it's really important. You need to ensure that you aren't controlling the contractor's schedule and their ability to say no. They must truly be independent. That word independent contractor is in there for a reason. Thus, you can give them projects and deadlines, but you must allow them the space, the time, and control to complete that project as they see fit. So in order to ensure if you've hired an independent contractor the right way, we're going to end this episode with a few questions. And I want you to make sure that you are consistently weighing these different factors for the contractors that you hire. So first, does your business control or have the right to control what the worker does and how the worker does the job? So you should only control the independent contractor's end product and not when or where he or she works in order to get the job accomplished. The second question, does your business control the business aspects of this person's job? These include arrangements like how the worker is paid, whether expenses are reimbursed, and who provides tools and supplies. An independent contractor should control and decide when they want to get paid. So if they want it biweekly, every week, monthly, they should be sending you invoices each time you pay them. They should not get reimbursed for expenses unless really the only exception here is traveling to somewhere for your company. And these independent contractors should be supplying their own equipment, their own computers, their own programs, their own cell phone, you name it. The next question is there a written contract or employee benefits such as a pension plan, insurance, or PTO/vacation pay? Independent contractors should never have additional benefits when working for you because it makes them look a lot like employees. So make sure they have their own financial plans in place like insurance and save up for their own vacations. You cannot pay them for PTO. And of course, they will be paying for their own taxes and you will not be taking any taxes out of their total gross pay. Also, in terms of contracts, just make sure that you are signing some type of independent contractor agreement when you hire them, just so it's crystal clear that they are a W-9 employee, and then you want to lay out the roles and responsibilities for you working together. And finally, the question that you need to continually weigh when you're hiring on contractors is, will the relationship continue, and is the work a key aspect of your business? Usually, you guys, an independent contractor is a short-term solution and is project-oriented. So if you want to have that relationship that involves a non-compete with a 1 to 2+ year agreement that they can't compete with your business, that is definitely someone you should hire on as an employee. If how and when they work is super important to you, like the hours and them coming into your office, then you also shouldn't hire them as a contractor. They should be an employee. So remember, temporary, project-oriented, they are just doing this task like copywriting or doing email inboxing, what have you. That is a contractor. Hopefully, you guys, after listening to this episode, you have gained so much valuable information and are so much more prepared now to hire your first or next worker. As always, I am open to any questions that you may have. Feel free to jump into our free private Facebook community. It's called The Legal Paige Community, and you can just type that into Facebook. I also have it on my show notes for this episode, and ask away with all of your questions. I am in there often helping out all of you legal pagers that are in the group. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode about independent contractors versus employees. I hope you have a great week, and I hope you tune in next week because we are going further with this topic on independent contractors versus employees with a very special guest. So make sure you subscribe to the Legal Paige podcast today so you don't miss it. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.